Did you know that McLaren has just accused Max Verstappen of manipulating the commissioners in full career? What seemed like a normal sanction could hide something much more serious. Before continuing, tell me in the comments, do you think Max exaggerated to harm Piastri? Are you using the psychological game to unbalance the championship? In this video, we will break down the last controversy in the F1, the sanction to Oscar Piastri in Silverstone, the explosive reaction of McLaren, and how Max Verstappen was in the center of the controversy. What happened in the Grand Prix of Britain 2025 was more than a simple sanction to Oscar Piastri. He was a trigger for a storm that now splashes Max Verstappen, Red Bull, and the Formula One sanction system. It all started on the hangar line, one of the fastest areas of the Silverstone circuit. Piastri, who marched behind the security car, applied a brake that, according to the commissioners, was excessive and unnecessary. That action cost him a 10-second penalty that completely changed the course of his career. But here we are not talking only about a technical error or a misinterpretation of the regulation. We are facing a possible case of political pressure within the paddock, of story manipulation, and above all, how a simple gesture behind the wheel can become a tactical weapon in the war for the championship. McLaren soon react. Andrea Stella, its director, raised the voiceless. He considered that the sanction was too hard and launched a phrase that changed everything. He hinted that other pilots, without naming anyone directly, could have made the incident seem more serious than it really was. That phrase ignited the alarms, because in this context, there is a name that everyone immediately relates to that comment: Max Verstappen. It is no accident. Verstappen was directly affected by that break. Just after the incident, he lost control and started in a spin that ruined his career restart. From Red Bull's point of view, Piastri's error was not only a technical problem, but a clear obstruction of his star pilot. But what seemed like a legitimate complaint by Red Bull took another nuance with McLaren's statements. If the insinuation is true, if someone really overaged the situation to press the commissioners, then we are not talking about pure competition. We are talking about mental strategy, of psychological war, of sports manipulation. At this time of the season, each point counts, and each sanction can completely alter the standings. Verstappen, which comes from a dominant season, is found this year in a completely different situation. McLaren leaders, and he is 69 points behind Oscar Piastri. The pressure is real, and in the midst of that pressure, any opportunity to weaken the rival is welcome, even if that means acting, exaggerating, or building a narrative that influences the opinion of the commissioners. With this panorama, it is impossible to ignore the growing tension between the leading equipment. McLaren feels that the sanction was disproportionate. Red Bull defends the decision of the commissioners. The question that remains in the air is simple but powerful. Are we facing a fair sanction or before a master play on media pressure by Red Bull? After the strong statement of McLaren after the sanction to Piastri, a series of rumors began to emerge that soon echoed throughout the paddock. It was not simply an angry reaction of a frustrated team. There was something else behind. The words of Andrea Stella, head of the McLaren team, showed an implicit but powerful accusation. Someone, perhaps a direct rival, could have exaggerated the incident to influence the decision of the commissioners. And although he did not give names, the atmosphere left a suspicion floating in the air. The phrase that detonated everything was when Stella said that some competitors have the ability to make it look that others commit a serious infraction when it is not. It is a strong statement. It is not common to listen to a team leader insinuating that the rivals are acting deliberately to manipulate the perception of the judges. In a sport where politics and mental play are part of the day-to-day, these types of statements are not made random. And if anyone knows how to send a message without mentioning it directly, it is Andrea Stella. Verstappen was one of the main affected by the Piastri maneuver. His car was destabilized just after the break, causing a spin that made him lose ground at a key moment. The narrative that was built from there was clear. What Piastri did committed Max's career, and therefore deserved a sanction. What was only a technical sanction has now become a matter of credibility. Did the commissioners sanction Piastri for what they saw in the data and in the images? Or were they influenced by the narrative that another team built? It is a very thin line, and it is precisely where McLaren is pointing. And if Max Verstappen, directly or indirectly, manage to mold the perception of the incident to obtain a strategic advantage, then we are talking about a very high mental level of mental play. One that not everyone is willing to admit publicly, but that is perfectly recognized within the paddock. These rumors are not minor, because if Verstappen is really using this type of maneuvers, although within what is allowed, the dynamics of the championship completely change. It is no longer just speed that is at stake. It is political intelligence, media manipulation, and a precise understanding of how to operate between the lines within the regulation. But silence, in this case, may be more revealing than any denial. In Formula One, sometimes, the most effective strategy is not to give explanations and let doubts work for you. While McLaren raised the tone with critical statements, from the other side of the garage, Red Bull maintained a very different position. For them, the sanction imposed on Oscar Piastri was more than justified. Piastri's brake behind the security car directly affected the preparation of Max Verstappen for the restart. And what came later was evident to all, an unexpected spin of the Dutch pilot who, in the middle of a curve, dislodged his car and made him lose key positions. For Red Bull, that error was not a product of chance or external conditions. It was a direct consequence of the Piastri movement. What Red Bull is doing, in essence, is to connect two facts that at first glance seem separate, the braking of one pilot and the error of another. When linking them, they build a narrative where Max Verstappen was not only harmed, but their subsequent disadvantage was caused by the imprudence of a rival. It is a strategic story, one that seeks to reinforce that the sanction was necessary, not as isolated punishment, but in response to an action that changed the course of the race for a contender to the title. But this is where it becomes more complex, because while McLaren speaks of exaggeration by other pilots and clearly point to Verstappen without saying his name, Verstappen, faithful to his style, has not publicly entered the controversy. But that does not mean that I am on the sidelines. Within the paddock, everyone understands that the game of Formula One is not limited to what happens on the track. The pressure, insinuations, and narrative are weapons as effective as ailerons or soft tires. And Max, who has already proven to be a mentally strong pilot, also knows when to let his team speak for him and when to stay silent so as not to intensify the fire. For now, Red Bull remains firm in its version. What Piastri did was dangerous, directly affected his pilot, and the sanction was fair. In a category such as Formula One, where each decision is measured to the millimeter, losing neutrality in the trial can cost much more than a race. One of the most immediate consequences is the loss of credibility in the sanction system. If McLaren really believes that the sanction to Piastri was influenced by a subjective interpretation, then we are facing a serious accusation, although it has not been directly formulated. What puts into play is not only the result of a career, but the perception of justice throughout the championship. If the equipment begins to feel that decisions depend more on external pressure than on the objective data, the authority of the commissioners is questioned. And in that scenario, respect for the rules begins to erode. There are also strategic consequences. If Verstappen managed to influence, directly or indirectly, the perception of the incident, that opens a new front in the battle for the title. It is no longer just about track performance, but a capacity to mold the narrative in your favor. Red Bull could be sending a very clear message. If we cannot overcome McLaren only with speed, we will also play out of the layout. That tactic, although risky, can be effective in such a tight season. But it can also become against him whether he is perceived as manipulation or as a way of weakening the rival by means outside the pure performance. In McLaren, these types of tensions can generate unwanted collateral effects. If the team feels attacked or manipulated, the natural response is to close ranks. However, when you have two pilots like Piastri and Norris fighting so closely in the championship, any external pressure can amplify internal tensions. On the other hand, there is a psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. For Piastri, receive a sanction that he considers unfair, and then see how it is insinuated that it was caused by theatrical maneuvers of a rival can generate frustration, insecurity, and even demotivation. For a young pilot who is having an outstanding season, this type of episodes can be a strong emotional blow. Everything that began with a seemingly routine sanction in Silverstone has ended up exposing a much more complex network of tensions, hidden strategies, and power struggles within Formula One. In summary, The controversy between McLaren, the FIA, and the figure of Max Verstappen has put on the table something that goes far beyond a penalty of 10 seconds. What seemed an isolated punishment today is perceived as the reflection of a silent war that is being freed both inside and outside the circuits. The central question of all this conflict remains without a definitive answer. Are we seeing a case of deliberate manipulation or simply a difference in criteria? The truth is that at this point of the season, any detail is amplified. And this particular situation has revealed how even seemingly minor decisions can trigger huge consequences, not only in the standings, but in the morals of the equipment and in the perception of the championship. Looking forward, it is clear that this will not be the last time we see such a situation. The 2025 season is demonstrating to be one of the most tight and tense in recent years. Each point counts. Each maneuver is checked with magnifying glass, and each statement can have real repercussions. The teams know it, the pilots feel it, and the public perceives it. This dynamic not only makes the championship more exciting, but also more volatile and less predictable. And what do you think of everything that is happening? Do you think McLaren is telling the truth? Or do you think Verstappen is simply playing your cards' intelligence? Leave me your opinion in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel.